All right.
Yeah,
Welcome. I'm Dave.
I'm Kristen.
So the idea for this show is that, we both graduated into the Great Recession with the wrong degrees,
Yep.
and we've had to, build our way to where we are now. Yet, given the COVID crisis and the 2 years of lockdown, we're reevaluating what's important and,
Yep.
wanted to share our journey and invite you on the journey with us, in starting our own side stuff and building that out, because you listen to the various podcasts or watch all the different YouTube videos, and a lot of times it's the people that have already completed a lot of the journey, or they're so far down that it's hard to see
Relate.
yourself as with them. So we want to invite you on with us and help define what success is, and use our experiences as an example to build either a side business for some financial freedom, or actually build your own organization while you are still doing that 9 to 5, and then how do you transition into your own thing. So
Yeah. Come along on the journey with us as we do the same.
mhm. So this is just going to be sort of a loose conversation. I think with this first episode, we're going to introduce ourselves, let you know who we are, what we're about, whether or not this type of show is for you, or if you can learn from all the other marketers that are out there. But we'll kick off with Kristen, and why don't you tell everybody about the journey to where you are now, and why you're doing what you do.
Oh God, yeah. So as you said, we both graduated the Great Recession. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the stuff that our generation has been through. And I don't think it's necessarily just our generation. Obviously, all the other generations are right along with us, but like the coming of age that we had when we saw 9/11, and then when we had social media become a force in our lives, and then it became this marketing tool, not just this place to just hang out with friends. And now we're becoming parents in a pandemic, and we've seen a second Great Recession, the Great Resign. We're seeing all these crazy things in our lives, and it's really affecting us in how we're looking at what our work looks like, what our life looks like, what it actually wants. So like, this is where I've been coming from. I have felt like I've always,
NPR,
yeah,
sorry, NPR was running errands over lunch today, and
yeah,
NPR had a thing on one of the podcasts about how for millennials, every major life stage has had
yes,
something blow up, right?
yes. Civil
Um,
unrest, like ridiculous stuff that's like not the civil unrest is ridiculous, but like we've just had really important cultural moments in
mhm.
our lives, and it's not been without its own stress. And it's like I think it's just like it's unprecedented. No one else knows how to handle this. So I think, and everybody that I talk to, I know we're all looking at our own jobs, our 9 to 5s, and going, how does this fit into what I want? Is this, yeah, there are great benefits. Yeah, there are this or that, or like, I like this aspect, but I don't like this aspect. And it's like, where can you feel fulfilled? And does that mean in our capitalist society, does it mean building a side business, or does it mean just having a hobby? Like, there are so many ways to look at it. And I've thought about this from like the moment of graduating, because when I graduated college, I had these awesome internships. So I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a degree in photography. Like, I loved photography, and I thought I was going to be like a National Geographic photographer and travel the world, whatever. So I ended up starting my own photography business, and I use air quotes because I minimized it. I failed. I felt like I personally, in my definition of success for that business, I failed. I learned a ton. I learned a ton. I also got a job as a medical receptionist and knew that I needed to pay my bills. Like, I had my bachelor's degree and I needed to pay for all of those student loans that I had. And learning like what it's like to be an employee versus and have this entrepreneurial spirit and then trying to also have your thing on the side and like balancing that, that's still something I very much deal with today, working my 9 to 5 and wanting to do my own side thing and potentially building up something to be maybe on my own or whatever that looks like. So I don't know. It's been a really interesting journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting with the normal employment piece, because on the one hand, it really depends on the managers you have, because
Yeah.
like luckily I've had supportive ones where I'll just tell them like, hey, I'm doing this thing on the side. It's my own sandbox because
Yeah.
y'all aren't letting me, implement half the ideas that I come up with. So I'm going to test them
Yep.
out, see if they can work, for me. Just to make sure in my own head that I'm actually recommending things that work, right? Because
Yeah.
especially in corporate, things move so slow. You have enough time to overthink things and start thinking that you
Absolutely.
don't know what you know.
Yep.
But then similar to you, right? Like I was doing a double degree in music composition and music production. And so that was one degree. The other one is creative writing. And did not have a good experience in the composition department because of, they were doing like avant-garde compositions, and I'm like, nah, I want to actually have a career. So I wrapped up, missing out like a couple of courses on the music thing, but you can see the guitar amp. Let's see this side, whatever. It's all backwards, right? I still have the studio, still have albums. I like 2009. I could write and I could play guitar, and that's the skill set that I knew that I could do. So I took a job in the school district because all my family is teachers.
Same.
Yeah,
that's also a really interesting aspect about both of us is our families were never in corporate America. So it wasn't something like we knew. It wasn't like a generational thing that just like got passed on to us. We had to figure out our way, how to break into corporate, and then what this culture was like too. So that's an interesting aspect.
Well, yeah, like my aunt had her own graphic design business, but yeah, the immediate family was definitely you have your nice little career, and then you have your hobbies, in the afternoon, and it might not be awesome every day, but you just keep doing it because that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
Well,
that was that generation too. It was like you graduate college, you get your job, you work there for 20, 30 years, and then you retire. And like you just take status quo. And like our generation's just not on that level.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons for this podcast, right, is us seeing that given the 90s, when all of the big layoffs started happening and the corporate scandals of, you don't have the 30 years guaranteed. The leaders aren't necessarily nice people. Even and then having the recession hit, where it's the go to school, get a job. Well, okay, it's 11% unemployment, or whatever it is, local for you. Those jobs don't exist anymore. That's just it stopped, right? And with the music industry, it's really interesting because 99 Napster came out. It was like a $14 billion industry for music production, CDs, all that kind of stuff. By 2006, I think I'd have to triple check the figures. I'm going off of memory. It was cut in half. It was like 7 billion left. And all of those jobs,
and Napster and
right. And so all of those jobs that got cut were the middle class music engineer, right? Where you just go from record to record and you're producing it and making it sound good. And then you also have the technology piece of it too, where the technology got so good that home recording can sound pretty professional, that you no longer need to book out a studio for $1,200 a day,
right,
or more, depending on what studio you're going to.
Right.
So there've been all the change, and then now with how easy it is to automate everything, it's the type of question that I think we're looking to answer and explore is, are you cool with the jobber life? or are you going to be at the point where you have something of your own where, you can take advantage of the automation instead of the automation, taking advantage of you and making your career
Yeah.
null.
Yeah.
And
And it's like a constant ebb and flow of, like, I see the benefits in keeping the 9 to 5, and then other times I'm like, but I want to build my own thing. And it's not ever a static, like, oh, I'm doing. And I think that some people do, are like, they're like, I'm gonna my sister runs her own business. She's like, I'm doing this. I love this. I want to do this. And she ran
mhm,
after it. And kudos to her. And I think that's one of the topics that we'll jump into eventually too, is the fear of like jumping into this. What does that look like? Of
right,
jumping into your own business, being an entrepreneur, full-fledged, like putting it all on the line. But for like right now, for both of us, our journey is that 9 to 5, and then this side gig, this side thing that we're building on our own. And both of ours, I think what's interesting about our two side gigs is not only are we at slightly different stages, but we're technically both building off of hobbies.
mm,
So um the like how I came to my business is I have a ton of hobbies. I've always jumped from hobby to hobby to hobby, and I've spent hundreds of dollars. Even when I had no money, I still found the money to buy things for my hobbies. So I've done like silversmithing, and like I can't even think of like the majority of the things I've done, but like knitting was always something I did, and I would keep coming back to it.
mhm,
And it was much like yoga for me in a sense, where I'd always come back to it. Like I'd go away from it for a long time and come back to it. And I never saw how I could make knitting a business. And I thought that it was always like this small scale, like really ridiculous thing. And I suddenly started to see it just in the last couple of years. And it became very, very clear to me. So I started playing out different ideas with revenue streams. And I have like, I'm looking at a whiteboard right now, and there's like 26 yellow post-it notes that have potential revenue streams. Like I was just brainstorming. Side note, I love brainstorming. And if you ever feel like it's like a waste of time, you need to like Google brainstorming activities. And there's a ton of really good ones out there. And they're just so entertaining. And you just
mhm.
like, it's this like fueling energy bubble. I feel like even if you don't even necessarily need to brainstorm, if you try it out and just apply one of your problems to it, it like, it fuels you up to keep going. At least that's how I
Well, I
feel.
think if you're innately creative, right? Because
True. I mean,
I have said out loud that I enjoy like 5-hour workshops. Like
yeah.
I like going offsite and doing these like crazy marathon workshop things, and people are like, God, you're a sadist. I'm like, no, you're wrong. You're thinking of it wrong, you know. But I mean, I was smiling as you were talking because when we met at the organization where we did, I remember you were talking
Yeah.
about, I'm going to do a coffee blog where I'm going to
Oh
test
my God. Yes.
all the different coffee beans from everywhere and the brew methods and the
This is
yada
so
yada yada,
amazing.
and you outlined everything, and then you were talking about
I never did it.
Norwegian Viking earrings that you know
Yeah, that was my silversmithing stuff. Yeah,
yeah. And so
it
I
wasn't
mean, it
Viking, it
has
was Norwegian.
taken a number of iterations for you to find
Oh my
what
God.
you
I have stopped and started, like my husband like will joke with me and be like, hey, you're gonna start another blog. Because I buy websites, I like pick out themes, I get everything set up on the back end, and then I do nothing with it. I do all the research, I do the keyword research, like, and then I do nothing with it. And I think what I've learned is there's definitely particular aspects where I get roadblocked. And now that I'm sitting here at this point, one of my major roadblocks, and I'm probably just coming to this right now. This is like a little therapy session right now for me. I'm coming to that, like writing full out blogs for me is intimidating.
Mm,
I've done it. Have I published them? No. But it's intimidating. But the way that I'm setting up my business, my knitting business, blog posts are not going to be one of my main things. They will definitely be a piece of the puzzle, because with content marketing and a content business, that obviously has to be a piece. But there's a way now, especially how far we've gotten with technology, I feel like, to your point of either adapt to automation or automation will adapt to you and you will get kicked out. Like
mhm.
we've even talked about with these recordings, how you can get transcripts that turns into essentially a blog post. And that's like, that is what search engines can filter through. I think we need to jump back a little bit and talk about how we met and like a little bit of our background, because I think some of these pieces of conversation will start to fit in place. So both of us, and Dave's way more of a guru than I am, but both of us have a lot of passion and knowledge around SEO. And that's how we came to be. So I started working for a nonprofit. That actually, after I got fired, PS, we should totally talk about that in a different future episode. I worked for a nonprofit and I was their first digital marketer. So I was doing their SEO, I was doing their analytics, I was their data analyst, their SEO specialist, their photographer, their video editor, like you name it. If I had to deal with anything digital, I was doing it. And I loved SEO and I loved the analytics part of it as well. And I ended up getting a job in corporate where Dave was working as an SEO. And so like my whole job was built around just running keyword researches, and we were very limited on not being able to totally doing tech implementations because of how large the corporation was. But it was funny because I remember meeting you and being like, so Dave had this long ponytail and was like wearing like all this heavy metal jewelry. And I was so intimidated by you at first.
I used to be worth looking at, and then this happened. I used to be worth looking at, and then this happened. You know,
I think it's better bald than the ponytail, but that's just me. I remember being so intimidated because you would just like come in with this confidence and you definitely knew what you were talking about. So that didn't help with like being not intimidated. But at the same time, you weren't afraid to ask for feedback and have hard conversations, which was like, I was like, this is a legit human being. Like I need to keep talking to this legit human being. And without having you as one of my people at that, I don't know if I would have survived.
Yeah, and it's such a weird trip to get from the guitarist piece to corporate suit, right?
Yeah.
And so there were just a lot of weird planets aligning kind of thing, in retrospect, right? Like I got out of college, like I said, in 2009. Well, that was around the same time that WordPress first launched and became a thing. And there happened to be a paraprofessional at the school I was working at who was building his own nonprofit and was building his own websites. And I would give him an hour-long break and sit in his study hall for a little bit. And so there were days where we would sit and he would show me WordPress and how it would work. And that was my introduction to SEO and writing. And, I was in the middle of... You already had
an affinity for writing with your creative writing background.
What was that?
You already had an affinity for writing with your creative writing background.
Yeah. I mean, it was an obvious thing, right? Because the whole writing piece is a natural kind of home for me. That I've always been the nerdy kid that would pull out the old typewriter when I was like third grade and just pound away. And like I remember I loved the Animorph series when I was in elementary school, and I was like, I'm totally writing a series like this in third grade. And so I sat down with this old typewriter my dad had, and I came up with my own version of it, and I got like 2 chapters into it before whatever it was, N64 or something at the time. So yeah, I mean, writing's always been a thing for me, and I was like I said, I could write and play guitar. So I was releasing my second record, or working on my second record, because I did my first one when I was 16 in high school, and recorded that in Nashville, and hand pressed them myself, sold 500 copies. Sitting around the dinner table putting the stickers on the burnable CDs and all that, right?
I did that, but it was more of like mixtapes type situation.
Yeah, but so that introduction to SEO, and then just realizing like, okay, yeah, I can't, this bureaucratic setup of the school district, I do not work in that environment.
Yep.
And so it took me a while to figure that out, but I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? And I was watching Netflix, and there was a documentary called Art and Copy, that's all about like the behind the scenes stuff on the most famous advertising campaigns, like the 1960s Beetle, VW Beetle campaign, the Nike Just Do It, Got Milk, the Wendy's Got Beef, like all that kind of stuff.
Was the I Heart New York on there?
Yeah.
I
And
had to
so
do a project on that my freshman year of college. And like, I think that's probably what got me like really going on like marketing, even though it was all subconscious because I like told myself I couldn't do marketing for some reason or advertising. But I loved Milton Glasser and I loved that style and like was obsessed with this like history aspect of it.
Yeah, and like I've always loved the behind the music kind of, studio documentaries from the favorite artists that I have. So that is like a perfect wheelhouse for me, that documentary on creative stuff. And I was sitting there watching, I'm like, oh my God, people get paid to do that. Like that's their job, is to come up that, yeah, I'm gonna go do that. I want to try to do that. What do you do? And being the son of teachers, school is the answer to everything, right?
Oh yes. So this
So
is
went and did the MBA and
yeah, your story is you went and got the MBA, right? I also geared up to get the MBA, but didn't end up doing it. So I think this is what's super interesting about the different, like just different paths that we chose based on like what was happening in our lives.
right.
So
And there's not a
talk
right
about your
way or a
MBA.
wrong way. There's just, whatever way you choose, right? I mean, that's
For
going to be
sure.
probably a central theme for us with this.
Yes.
And anybody still listening at this point. Yeah, I think for me, because it was the artist piece, right? Nobody was going to hand me anything, right? Nobody was hiring people who had the degrees at the time.
Right. Why would they take you seriously if you just have like an art degree?
Yeah, creative writing and guitarist. What? Yeah.
That's how I felt.
So I knew I needed something to legitimize the experience, right? Because I had started a record company and artist management company with a friend in college, and I was mostly his thing, but I helped it along and did what I could, and that was really good experience in what does it take to actually write a business plan, and that kind of stuff, like sitting in the college,
I googled that.
student union and all of that, hashing that out. So yeah, and it just took whatever jobs I could, right? Like still working on the music, trying to get gigs with the friends of mine who were making a go of it as musicians, and doing freelance writing. Like I did ghost writing for plastic surgeons, and I mean that was a weird trip writing about that stuff, and decided I hate the vanity of the products that I'm selling here, so I'm not going to do this anymore. And luckily, out of once I finished my MBA, I got a job at an agency, and then that was a great role because it allowed me to test what industries I would be interested in.
That's a really smart way to think about it.
Well, it was also, I mean, going back on, okay, where are the creative people in business, in marketing? Well, okay, they're at the agency side, right? But then I got a job in the B2B side, and most people don't think B2B is interesting, but now I love the B2B side. That's where most of the money is. That's where a lot of the interesting products are.
I think it's more challenging in some really interesting ways. Like consumer, not that consumer isn't like B2C being like business to consumer, like that stuff's interesting, especially we can do like direct and e-commerce, like that stuff's interesting for sure, because you can see results and you can tie things, but you end up with a whole different set of challenges. We are probably going down a path of corporate speak. We should probably turn back.
Well, yeah, and I guess this is a good opportunity to say, hey, anybody that if we say something that you don't know or you have questions, just drop a comment, hit us up on the website, hit us up on socials. We'll be more than happy to answer things and clarify, or if it's like, good God, shut up. Well, we don't want to hear from you. So you can, trolls can stay home. So yeah, I think then the SEO, content development, all that stuff, that is definitely my wheelhouse. I'm more and more interested in, what actually makes a business tick,
Yeah.
right? And what are the operations behind that? And that's definitely one of the reasons for the side piece, because I don't, in the normal day-to-day with the given org structure that I'm under right now, that I just don't get access to that, and I'd have to wait 15 years in order to get it. And
Well, I think
why wait?
what you said earlier about this being like your personal sandbox, I feel the exact same way. I get to have control over things and try things out and fail or not fail or reap the benefits or not reap, like that's all part of it. And like it is scary in some sense, but it's also really cool and freeing, and like
Mhm.
it's another outlet. It's another way for my brain to, like, for me, I started off in marketing a way back when. Now it
Mhm.
feels like way back when. In real life, it was probably like 7 years ago, 6 years ago. I don't know. Um, and now I'm in project management and scrum mastering. And so like
Mhm.
my brain on the daily is more about how to organize work and make lives for make the work life easier for people, and track to goals, and make sure that we're producing according to expectations. And that's completely different from my side stuff where I'm like thinking about how do I want to run a social media overarching strategy in line with my business mission.
Mhm.
Like that's a whole different way of thinking about things. And to like your point of like you have these specialties of like creative writing and like SEO. I was doing photography, and not that like I do photography that much anymore in the same sense, but like I jumped into being a social media specialist. Like I was actually a paid social media specialist for
Mhm.
corporate America, where I learned, from the get-go how to use like Facebook Ads Manager and all that stuff. And with either large budgets, and then I played on the side with my sister's business or with my business, whatever, doing small stuff. And to see the vastly different, and I'm sure you saw this in ad agencies, like the
Mhm.
very vastly different tactics that you could utilize to line up with your strategies. So it's like that creative aspect. It just is a really cool way that it's evolved, and that I can implement that same type of thinking to something very different.
Mhm.
Um, you also said something earlier about like for creative people. And while I do believe there are creative people, I also believe there are non-creative people that can learn to be creative if they want to. So like I totally believe if there are people that want to be entrepreneurs but feel like they're not creative enough, or they're being told that they're not creative enough, blow people out of the water, prove them wrong. Do something,
Mhm.
just learn, do
Mhm.
something and learn. And I hope like us going on this journey, and people, whether they're creative or not, coming along with it gives them ideas and how to like set this up and tackle things, and look at their mindset and look at actual specific tactics and how to like orchestrate things, can really like open up new ideas for them.
Right. Well, and I think that I was talking to a friend yesterday who, I've known him since we were both 3, and he's gone off and done a lot of really random things, had to find himself and went industry to industry and job to job for a while before he finally was like, you know what? I want to be a cop. And everybody's like,
Yeah.
what? All right, cool. Like nobody ever saw that coming from him. Right.
Yeah.
But good for him. He found it. Um, but he, upon reflecting on it, he said that um it took the time to actually go through and be self-reflective enough to figure out like, okay, this sucks right now, but I need to figure out what it is I'm about, what it is I want to do. And if you're at that stage, that's the most important thing that you can do, is to just try things, figure things out. Once you get past that stage and you understand, you know, this is kind of the inkling of what I want to do, right? Then let's go. Right. And I think when we first met, you were kind of at that point where it's that I think I know I want to do this, but I don't know what
Totally.
products, um, what channels I want to do. Right. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing for me. Like I've had this idea for this guitar site, right? beginningguitaronline.com. And I had the idea since like 2014. I bought the domain, I secured all the social media stuff, and I'm just like, I'll figure it out. Right. Because I
Yeah.
was teaching guitar lessons the whole time I was doing freelance writing, the whole time I was going to school, it was just like, I've always had just these collections of revenue streams to try to make something work, right? You do what you have to do while while you're building.
Absolutely.
And one of my students, I got halfway through and it was like, you're not looking at the sheets that I hand you. Why? And then he admitted that he was dyslexic and it was hard for him. And I'm like, dude, why did you not tell me? I would have adapted. I would have,
Yeah.
And so once we had that conversation, it was like, man, this would just be so much easier if I recorded everything, because then he can go back and view this stuff. He can go
Accessible content.
Yeah. And so of course I didn't end up doing it. But he was still, the inspiration for a lot of it, because it was, one of the other problems too with the guitar teaching thing is that you are totally at the whim of everybody's calendar schedule, right? You have school start stops, you have when most people go up north, Memorial Day, July 4th, Thanksgiving, Christmas to New Year's, all of that. Nobody's going to lessons, right? So those are the weeks that you can write off.
Pre-pandemic too, right? Like, and that's all in person. So that's a whole other level.
And so it'll be one of those things where it's like, okay, if you pay me and I don't get paid, for unless you come to the lessons, right?
Yep.
I would hate to just give up a week of progress. So why don't you, pay me the monthly fee? Here's the access to the records of the charts and whatever, so that you can go do the lessons, right?
Right.
I mean, it's easy to have that idea, but then once you actually start going to, okay, what does that actually look like? What's the work that goes into it? It's like, okay, this is why nobody is really doing it.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot of work, but it's worth it, once you do it. But, long story long, the reason I did the guitar thing was, this is what I do anyway. I'm going to be playing. I want an excuse to explore the techniques that I haven't necessarily sat down and looked at yet. One of the biggest aspects of guitar playing is figuring out what kind of guitar player are you, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's a thread that's a similar in knitting too. Yeah. Well, and when you first told me about this idea, how so?
Yeah.
Oh, knitters.
I know nothing about knitting, so.
I mean, you've learned a little bit in the time that we've talked about it, but that's fair. Unless you don't remember any of it, which I guess I don't blame you. And this is like, it probably takes years for the average person who's a hobbyist to get there. But like, as you knit more and more, you start to realize there's certain techniques you like to do and certain things you absolutely hate to do. Mm-hmm. I love the look of lace knitting. For the life of me, cannot do it. Like, I can do it, but like, it is not enjoyable to me. The process of creating the garment or the scarf or the whatever in lace is like not enjoyable for me. However, doing like Fair Isle technique, give me that any day. I love that stuff. I'll like breeze through it. I love it.
What is that? So that's
kind of like, it's Fair Isle is actually Nordic. And I mean, there are actually a ton of different cultures that have done Fair Isle. But it's if you think of like Norwegian sweaters is the easiest thing I can grab from my brain right now of what the example is. So it's usually two colors, or sometimes it can be more than that.
Oh yeah, like the blue and white, like kind of stereotypic.
And there's like Norwegian stars and stuff, and like.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't own any of that, but yes, I know what you're talking about.
Okay. Well. When you first started talking about, like, in my world and knitting, I can see all the differences, right? And you can see all the differences in your world. And I think the hardest part that we, as a challenge of like running a side business, is if that is part of or integral to your business, like, how do you get the consumer to understand, or who is your audience? So I think we'll jump into that in a different podcast too. But when you originally told me about BGO, I was like, doesn't this already exist? Like, don't people already do this? Like, or aren't there large guitar companies already doing this? Because wouldn't that behoove them to like set up people to buy their product? Mm-hmm. And when you started telling me about the research that you were doing, I was actually really astonished that there weren't a lot of companies doing what you're actually going after.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things I mean, we'll definitely hit up on upcoming podcasts. One of the first ones is what, Joe Pulizzi calls finding your tilt, right?
Oh
So what's
yeah,
the thing that makes you different than everybody else in a crowded thing? Because, just like musicians, right? Just because there's somebody that already plays guitar in a band doesn't mean you shouldn't have your own band, right?
right.
Um,
That reminds me, I need to tell you, I came up with mine. I
okay.
haven't even told you yet. I'm not going to tell you right now. Future
Offline.
episode.
Cool. Yeah. A little cliffhanger.
It's
Because I
really,
think the with the stuff that we've talked about, right? There's the um having ownership of your own future.
yep,
There's being willing to have your own opinion and being willing to state that, right?
yeah,
And um no one is going to be able to have your perspective on
yeah,
same things because everybody's going to look at the same problem differently.
yes,
We've experienced that the last 6 years. And the biggest thing for me, coming to a corporate Fortune 100, whatever,
mhm,
it's like, wow, okay, all these people that are super smart, and they are super smart,
yep,
but they get in their own way.
yeah,
And so then that becomes the superpower of being willing to do things
yeah. It's
and put
human nature
yourself
to get
out
in our own
there,
way. So
right?
like us learning from other people that are getting in their own way, like what does that look like? And then how do we apply not doing that in our own lives? And I think one of the things you and I talk a lot about too is the power of saying no.
Mm,
So that's one thing that I know that we'll definitely be talking about too in the future, because that is really hard. And especially as
yeah.
we as parents and with little kids, we each have our own little kid. Like that's time. Like saying yes to something means you're spending time on something that you're not spending time on with your kid or with your own
Mhm.
thing or with your spouse or whatever. And that's all.
Well, and that's one of my favorite quotes. I forget who said it, but if you're in the game long enough, you'll hear it at every conference. Um, is that marketing strategy or business strategy is about saying no. It's not about the projects you say yes to. It's what you say no. This isn't important right now.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely a skill set,
Oh yeah.
and that the ability to ruthlessly prioritize and not hold on to something
Prioritization.
just
Oh my
because
God.
you have some feelings for it.
Yeah.
um
And you have to grieve it too if you have feelings for it, but then you have to say no to it because you've prioritized other things for potentially more important reasons. Like
mhm,
prioritization, I think we haven't even talked about this, but I think we need to have a whole episode on prioritization. That's
mhm,
literally my job, is like my 9 to 5 is I talk to people every day about prioritizing work, because if we don't know, or if, whether as in a large corporation or in our side business, what is actually a priority, it does not give us the confidence to say no.
mhm.
And then you run around like a chicken with your head cut off, and you have all this effort in 80 different areas and nothing's paying off.
Right.
I Yeah,
Yeah, and
we can
it's
easily
not
talk
just
about this for
that.
3 hours.
It's the silos. It's um all the political games,
That's a whole
right?
nother thing.
The pet projects of whatever leader, even though they don't
Yeah.
fit into reality. um
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
This podcast is going to be good for me because since everything's on record, I'm going to have to be, overly positive. Um,
I
than my
mean,
normal
that might be
state.
a skill that you could exercise if you want to.
Yes.
But
Speaking,
there is
yeah,
a thing for
personal
toxic
development and growth.
positivity, so I'm not all for that.
I am so anti-positivity. And actually, I think um, that's going to be one of our unique propositions with this podcast, the fact that we're both upper Midwest, um, can do kind of people. It's not the overly brutal East Coast. It's not the overly positive West Coast. Like, all right, guys, this is so awesome. We're going to do it. No, I'm not
Coming out of the
listening to
gate
you
hot.
for more than like 2 minutes. Like, go eat kale and shut up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully it's a realistic view on the shit that we actually go through. And it's
Mhm.
not this toxic positivity. Everything's going to be great. Yeah, it's going to be great, but there's going to be crap that you have to wade through first. And it's not going to be easy. But like, I think we have a ton of things to talk about on how we can either make it easier, outline things more clearly, or wrap your head around it. Like, mental health
Yeah.
in is extremely important. If you're going to do your own, it's extremely important, period. If you're going to do your own business, you're relying on yourself. There's a
Mhm.
lot of self-confrontation you're going to need to do and do some work on that, whether you like it or not.
Right.
So we'll
When
have
I used to
plenty of things
introduce
to talk about
myself,
that.
like, the corporate side, right? You do the round tables of, hi, I'm Dave. This is,
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, even self-employed, I hated my boss. And there would be the people who would laugh at that. I'd be like, all right, we can be
You're like,
friends.
you were like weeding them out. You're like, you
Mhm.
are my people.
Oh, totally. And then the people that were like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm gonna have some problems with you. All right. I'm gonna
Pick
make
it up faster,
sure.
Jan. Pick it up faster.
I'm gonna walk gingerly around you. Um, yeah, because if you can't have a sense of humor while you're doing the hard work, right? I mean, it is hard work. It's
Yeah.
not easy. We're not
Yeah.
doing get rich quick stuff.
No,
Like
that stuff
we're
doesn't
not doing
exist.
we're not talking about,
It's not real.
starting an Uber thing. Nah, this
Right.
is
This is an
finding
Instacart.
something that you're interested in spending the majority of your time devoted to and doing that,
Yeah.
right? And what does that look like? How are you setting yourself up for success? How do you build the support networks that you
How
need?
do you balance it
Right.
with the, and I hate the word balance because I do feel like that means that you should have like 50% of this and 50. No, applying the appropriate effort that you need to in order to make your goals.
Hmm.
But yeah, all of that. We're going to go over all of that.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Hopefully,
Yeah.
this was a good introduction into the way that we at least handle our masterminds with one another.
Yeah.
And
Glimpse
you
into
know,
our world.
exactly. So we'll in future episodes we'll pick some topics. We'll do some deep dives
If you
and
have topics that you want to hear
Mhm.
about, please let us know. We would love to know what you guys are thinking.
Definitely. And on your podcast player, if you enjoy this, please rate it, review it, help us get the
Subscribe.
episode found. Yeah, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell, all that YouTube stuff. And yeah, by all means, drop a comment, let us know, and we will see you with a new episode in 2 weeks.
And 9
So
aside.
take care.